How many of you are on call today? Can't see. Okay. How many of you have been on call in the last few weeks or will be on call? Cool. On call's ruining my life. It's probably ruining yours too, right? There were some claps. And some other tales about holding the pager. I just had an intro. I guess I don't need to say much because that intro was really nice. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Hotpot that happens to be building a tool in this space. I'm a little biased. But I've been on call for a long time. I got started in technical support, sysad stuff back before we had SREs, that kind of thing. And I've built a bunch of tools in this space. I've owned a lot of tools in this space. And today I'm going to talk about on call. But first I'm going to tell you a story about me and Kafka and being on call. About 10 years ago, I was working at a small startup, and we ingested a lot of data over Kafka, wrote it into a database, queried it back out again. And one day, through an ill-fated UI, me pressing a button I didn't understand, and a bunch of other mistakes, I managed to make Kafka stop working right in the middle of the day. I froze it completely up. I could go into details. I don't really remember that much, but what I do remember is the core memory that I created that day of on-call never feeling the same to me. I had been on call for probably 15 plus years at that time, and on-call never really bothered me that much. I was mostly okay with it. It didn't wreck my life or anything. I do have some weird stories from being on call at Twitter that one involves One Direction, another involves Charlie Sheen. Like, pretty neat stuff happened, but it didn't upset me. But after this event, with Kafka frozen, all the customers not going to be able to get any data, it was the middle of the day, but I still felt really alone. I felt really hopeless. I'm going to stop my memory here, just so that you have it frozen in your head and you remember poor Cory sitting at his computer being upset. I'm sure many of you have felt similar feelings. This is the big hairy slide for my talk. Most organizations are not set up to support engineers handling the workload, interruptions, and stress of on-call. But teams are doing it anyway. I like that there are pictures being taken. I'm going to have a lot of pull quotes today because this talk is supported by a lot of people who filled out a survey. As far as leadership is concerned, heroics are a viable long-term strategy. I am not here to pick on VPs of engineering and CTOs today. You shouldn't be concerned if you're in that role with what an individual person is feeling in terms of them getting woken up on a given night. There's a weird mismatch between the people who experience these problems and sort of the leadership side of the equation. Here is the shape of this talk today. I'm going to talk about the research that we did to support this talk. I'm going to talk about the findings, aka the no good 9, because we are clever. I'm going to talk about recommendations for how you can get yourself out of some of these messes. And I'm going to talk about next steps, because the work is definitely not over. First off, let's talk about the research. I have, as was stated in my intro, been doing this for many decades now. I'm largely self-taught. I didn't go to school for this. I managed to land a job at some cool places, and then one day I started reading papers by Holnagel and Woods and Decker and Cook, and I was like, wow, there's so much neat stuff going on in the world. And then I started to apply it to my job and started to talk about it a bit and give a few talks. But in this particular case, I'm now the founder of a company, and I have a lot more resources at my disposal. I'm not just an SRE giving a talk. And so I reached out and said, hey, we need to do research here. I want to back this talk with a lot of data. I don't just want to stand up here and tell you about my context at my individual company, but instead, let's talk about the industry and let's talk about your companies. To support this, we reviewed a whole bunch of papers, both academic papers, industry articles. We also did a survey that had 65 questions. If you happen to be in the audience and filled out this survey, thank you. I really appreciate that. But from all this, we got some demographics. I'm not going to go through this whole slide. I just want you to kind of have some context for what we're going to be talking about today. The average role, SRE. Mean time of experience, how much time you've been in the industry, 18 years. 4 years at a company. Size of your on-call rotation, probably on the high side of 5, somewhere 5 to 10 range. And then lastly, size of your engineering org. Lot of reasonably sized organizations, 500 plus people. So this is the context. Just want you to sort of understand the shape of people that interviewed or that answered the questions that we sent out. Now, one of the things we asked them was, are you happy with the status quo of on-call? Are you happy with the status quo of on-call? Raise your hand if you're happy with the status quo. No one turned around and looked. No one raised their hand, okay? That's the way that is. So then we asked, how do you feel about your organization? Is your organization status quo? 57% of people said they were status quo or a little bit worse. Right? Nobody's happy. 30% of people said that their organization was either trending toward or was already a dinosaur. So 87% of people completely unhappy. Great. So then we asked about a bunch of different dimensions. I'm not going to go through every one of these. It's going to be basically the summary of this talk is that I'm not going to go through everything, but there are a lot of detail here. If you just sort of squint at this, it's just orange. There's very little green, right? People are just unhappy. We're going to talk about a bunch of this stuff in turn. You don't have to squint at the slide. So that's the high-level context. We did all this research. We looked at all this academic work. We looked at what the industry was talking about. And now we're going to bring you a bunch of findings and the aforementioned, cleverly titled, No Good 9. Anybody familiar with the FAA's Dirty Dozen? Anybody seen that before? A couple of nods and head shakes in here. Similar, gives you a nice mnemonic to remember these things. Take pictures. It's going to come back. There's going to be a lot of pretty colorful slides here. We're not going to have time to talk about every single one of these today. I could spend hours probably talking about them. We're going to think about 7 of them. If we have questions, we can go over the rest. If you catch me in the hallway, I'll dodge you. And then if you eventually pin me, then I'll be like, OK, fine, I'll tell you about one of them. The first one I want to talk about is onboarding and training. I'm going to talk about it first because it's the worst. More people were unhappy with onboarding and training than any other topic we asked about in OnCall. 2.35 out of 4 stars was the average. Could you shut the door? That's really loud. 34% of people said that their training or onboarding was worse than standard, and only 13% of people felt that this was better. And this is bad. I also don't tend to see in a hiring description for a job, like in a JD, a job description, you don't tend to see a lot of people describing on-call. In my many years of interviewing people, I've very rarely had everyone ask about on-call, yet the training process for on-call seems really bad, and we're not doing a very good job. So another pull quote, one of my favorites of this talk, we never get new team members, we just lose them. At least you don't have to train anybody. The upside. Unsurprisingly, on-call is heavily based on reactive improvement. On-call is it's sort of the junk drawer of ops is what I like to call it. It's just where stuff goes when you don't know what else to do. And so what do? You fix what breaks. A lot of these are summaries. There's not literally no strategy, but consistently across the people that we spoke to, they said there was no real strategy in the organization for how they approached reactive improvements or how to be more proactive. No measurement across very many of these things. We create tons of alerts, tons of process, tons of what have you, and there's no real measurement if any of it's successful. And very rarely is there any investment in the space. And one positive note in the top left corner, we did find that some people who did say they had a good experience tended to have regular meetings about this topic. So they would meet weekly, monthly, to have conversations about on-call and what they could do about it. A quote from Ren Daniels here. This is I can't really read that, the contrast, Cory. How to create sustainable on-call rotations. This was a lead dev article, but there was also a Stripe increment article. On-call is a dynamic living thing. Because computers suck and entropy and whatever, on-call's just going to get worse over time if you don't take proactive steps. That's why this lack of this only reactive stuff isn't going to help you long term, because you have to have enough slack in the system to properly deal with the work that's going to come from on-call. So you don't have time to do the things that you're doing on call. Why don't you? Well, many times people cited that they didn't have agency. 20% of people said they couldn't or wouldn't update alerts. That sucks. Why couldn't you update alerts? Sometimes you can't because there are no permissions. You're not allowed to be, you're on call for something that you don't even have the ability to control. Some teams cited that they couldn't fix these problems. They could only escalate them to somebody else. They sort of had to pass the burden along. Sometimes there were stakeholders blocking these things. And these are with the best of intentions, right? You've got customers who have something that they pay attention to. You have an executive who's got a pet metric, often because it's representative of something that a customer needs, and they don't want to be surprised by that. This last slide's worded a little funny. I'll try to deliver it right, but only 30% of people sometimes felt that they were supported when attempting to deal with overload their way. So they didn't have the agency to deal with the fact that they were overwhelmed by being on call. They tried to do something, but the organization they didn't feel was very supportive. So there's not a lot of agency. I'm sure many of you have been in situations where you just didn't feel like you could do anything about the thing that was overloading you, or about the things. So what do we have if we don't have any agency? Well, we also, can I change this? I don't know. Maybe there's no process to change it, or maybe it's so convoluted, I don't know how to change it at all. 7 people said that there were no prioritization of improvements in their organization for on-call. It was commonly cited that they didn't know how to deal with escalation paths, how to use them, where they should go, when they should use them, when they're allowed to use them, et cetera, that they didn't know what to alert on. If you were here for the last talk, someone asked a question about alerting on memory, and his answer was don't. But is that in my process? Like, how do I know that? Does my organization help us with this? 34% of people said that their team doesn't monitor how their on-call practices, tools are working. Does this mean they don't check for the metrics of the alerts to see if they're ever working? Do they page people or not? Are they successful? I don't know, but it's definitely bad. There's 2 blocks up on the right. I want to talk a little bit about SLOs. Like, first off, can I take a shower when I'm on call? Because I only have 5 minutes to answer the phone, or this is going to get skipped. And if it gets skipped, am I in trouble for this? Who does it go to? Why does it go to them? Why does it take this time? This was a point of frustration. And the deployment tracking is sort of a class of issues. Like, I know when I get paged, it's really bad when later I'm like, well, when did that get deployed? What do you mean we turned this feature flag on? This customer started? I didn't think this was going out until next week. This idea of what's happening when I'm on call, my sort of mental model, how accurate that is of what the system's doing and how it's doing. So deployment tracking was sort of a common theme here to understand when the stuff that I'm doing on call is affected. It is atrocious. It's too complex. On call is hampered by too much process and too few permissions. And customers shoot themselves in the foot, but it's the cloud, so it's our foot. These are actual quotes, by the way. Thank you so much to the people who did this. You've made everybody laugh and made me look funny, and I appreciate that. Handoffs being completely unsupported. 28% of people said they never expected to get an on-call handoff. 11% said they sometimes get a handoff. So if you roll that up, 39, 40% of people can't rely on getting a handoff. One person, I didn't do this in a pull quote, but one person's idea of an on-call handoff was they said, well, someone tells me, here you go, have a good night. Now, handoffs are kind of important. We don't tend to do a lot with them. They're very sort of underutilized, I think, in the space, not a lot of tooling around them. But we know they're valuable. They're really great. This is actually a big inspiration for me, this particular paper by Chad Todd, Handover Communications and Software Operations. The complexity and uncertainty of information provided during a handoff can affect an engineer's confidence in understanding the current state of the system. The opportunity to take a few minutes to talk to the person who's just coming off call so they can give you a little information. We often think that the people who are coming off, or as I'm coming off call, I just assume they know. I'm like, oh, they know about all that stuff. They were watching the trash Slack channel where we spray all our alerts, or they read the last 3 incidents, or whatever. They're paying attention. People probably aren't paying attention. We'll talk more about that in a bit. A little foreshadowing there. Scheduling, obviously a hot topic of being on call. 2.85 stars out of 4 for shift frequency. It's not horrible. Schedule management, the ability to sort of control the schedule and how you're on call, 2.83 out of 4. But 53% of people sometimes or always feel anxious about being on call. In your heart, raise your hand. Now you don't have to raise your hand. I don't want to call you out. Don't be anxious about it. In your heart, raise your hand if on call makes you anxious. Sure shit makes me anxious. Anyway, a lot of people feel anxiety about being on call. And if we look back at some of these slides, if I wasn't trained and if I have no agency, I'm not being whiny. It's because it sucks. And nothing's set up to support me. Now, we were also seeing common conversations about the difficulty in changing a schedule, the sort of like reciprocity of being able to move things around, change who's on call, make adjustments for life, that kind of stuff. One thing we did find was interesting. We did a lot of these surveys also for our own product reasons. We found that, hey, 24/7 rotations for 1 week, that seems pretty fair. So that was a good finding to learn that that's a pretty industry standard thing in something that I will say is largely a folk model. There's very little definition for how on call should work. We just sort of copy it around between teams. Too many responsibilities. I'm going to spend a lot of time on this slide. Well, not this slide, but a whole bunch of other slides that are all about too many responsibilities. So I couldn't get to some of the other 9. SLAs not being sustainable. If you don't know what a service level agreement is, it's an agreement with a third party, probably a customer, that says, we're going to be up this much time, and if we're not, you can get money from us. It's really common for engineers to not even know what they are or who they apply to, because that's usually the domain of sales and legal. So the organization knows about it, but the people don't. And this isn't the only reason, but there are many other reasons that artificial, not actual, urgency can be introduced into the on-call process. If you were listening to the last talk, I'm just going to use it as repeated examples. The idea that an alert could fire in the middle of the night and there's not enough memory on a system, okay, what do you want me to do about that? Is that urgent or is it not urgent? Am I going to be dinged? It seems nobody's measuring the process anyway, so maybe not, but you only know that because of this talk. Don't misuse that information. When we have too many responsibilities, we can't get ahead of the workload. And we end up getting into an efficiency and thoroughness trade-off, ETTO, if you know about that. So we have to figure out how to deal with all of this. And honestly, what we mostly do is we sort of just run the bases. We go out there and we mark the alert as resolved, and we move on with our life, or we mute it for a day. I know that's a power move I've used many times in my life. Shout out to the tool vendors who implement mute, because that's really great. Just, I don't know, tell me tomorrow. But we're just sort of kicking the can, right? We're not really dealing with the problem. We're just running the bases. So we asked people, if you're overwhelmed, we knew this was going to come up, so we asked, if you're going to be overwhelmed, what are you doing? In addition to on-call, the average engineer is saying, I do 4 other things. One of them is dealing with incidents. That doesn't have to be like sort of co-located with being on call, but it commonly is, because if you get paged, you're going to escalate maybe up into being an incident. Not every page is an incident, by the way. We tend to think about it that way, but it isn't. It's just a convenient piece of machinery that we sometimes use whenever pages come up. But what else are we doing? How many of you are attending meetings at the same time you're on call? About 75% of you would raise your hand if I wanted to slow down and make you do it. I don't have to anymore because it's all here on the screen. You're also dealing with internal and external support requests. That's really common, by the way. We found a lot of people who are on call and also dealing with incidents, helping team members, customer teams, sometimes even outside customers, like people who are using your product that are paying you money or what have you. And in addition to this, we're maintaining alerts, updating run books. Cory's just reading the slides, fixing bug tickets, feature development, et cetera. So many things that you probably already know and you've probably already read, so there's no reason for me reading them to you. Now, you're probably sitting in the crowd. Now, here you are at a site reliability engineer conference. You're bettering yourself. You're sitting listening to all these awesome people other than me talk about all this rad stuff. And you're probably thinking, if I just worked a little harder, if I was as smart as this other person or whatever, this cool performer who gets promoted at my company, I would probably be better at dealing with overload. Well, guess what? It's not you. It's all of us. Dealing with being overwhelmed like this, it's actually pretty well studied. We know what happens when overload comes up. These are the things. On the left, this is what the literature says. You're going to shed load, reduce thoroughness, shift work and time, or you're going to recruit resources. That's what you're going to do. What does that mean in practice? Well, on the right, we're going to cut lower priority activities. That's a biggie. We could work on everything but spend less time. We could give up quality, push back some deadlines. That's always comfortable. We could work ahead and save some time later, work more hours, or we could ask the people around us for help. Well, if we know that the literature says we're going to do this, well, let's just ask as part of the survey. Where are people spending their time? Well, whenever they get overwhelmed, they stop doing low urgency tasks. I think low urgency tasks are cool. Like, you know, everybody loves Hack Week. Why? Because you get to do all the low urgency stuff. But we're cutting out so many of the fun things, or so many of the things that were probably proactive. We're also overwhelmingly asking our manager for support, and we're asking our team for support. It is a myth that only one person is on call all week. We are smearing it around to the rest of the team. We're also sometimes pushing back deadlines. Hey, I have not told you a lot of positive things. Look, we're very rarely giving up on quality. That's cool. We're site reliability engineers, right? We're reliable. That's cool, though. We're not giving up on the things that are important to keeping the site operating, et cetera, but we are smearing the workload across the team. My biggest complaint about on-call is that it's high risk, low reward. You have to work very tactically to avoid making your management chain or customers upset. It doesn't help your performance review, and it won't get you promoted. This is the no good 9. Again, in pretty colors. We skipped a few. That's okay. We're not going to go through those, but we're just going to spend a few minutes talking more about what this means to organizations. On-call engineers and line managers are carrying the costs of poorly structured on-call programs and tooling. What the organization is lacking, we are making up for with the individuals inside the teams. 74% of the engineers we survey reported experiencing overload, burnout, or both, in part due to on-call responsibility. 3/4 of this room, if you're a representative, have felt this or are feeling this now. So, Kafka. Here I am sitting at my desk, no idea what to do. Ever since that day, this is probably not really true, but in my sort of brain, it's ever since that day, on-call has hurt. Like, I feel it in my gut. This was before, this was in between me working at Twitter at Stripe. I took Stripe down a few times, and every time I did it, I felt it. Like it was like a punch in the stomach. I felt that drop in my stomach. Oh no. And to me, it all felt like it started here. I didn't know what to do. I was overwhelmed. And this is hard to say out loud. Like I'm a big, cool SRE. I've worked at all these great places, but I was just out. I didn't have any more energy for it. And what happened was my teammate, who is now my co-founder, was like, hey, I think you need to have a lie down. And he took over. And the team took over for me. They saw what happened, they saw how I felt, they saw my reaction, and they said, you go somewhere else. Let us take over. We got it from here. And that's what they did. And even though this story is hard, and it's hard for me to tell, and it impacted, I mean, even to this day, my partner asks me about on-call at companies when I start at them, because she remembers this. She remembers how that felt and what that did to me, but it wasn't just that story. It was the entire time I worked at the job. People, your team, is working together to overcome the organization's shortcomings in this space. Now, let's be positive for a little while. 3.33 out of 4 stars for teammate support. That's what people said about their teammate. 3.15 for managers. 50% of people rated their teammates 4 stars. You guys are awesome. You're all awesome together. 83% of people said they could confidently and consistently count on teammates to help troubleshoot, respond to incidents, and cover them, and 87% reported their manager will help them if they've got these sorts of problems. That is really, really great. We're doing the work locally, which is very cool. Even though the organization isn't really supporting it, we're doing the work locally. Okay. This isn't an individual engineer problem. This is not a manager problem. This is an industry problem. We're sort of copying and pasting these practices across different organizations. We don't have the tooling, we don't have the awareness, we're not doing the measurement. It's an industry-wide problem. In our survey, being responsible for real work was the most common reason, there's a very sarcastic set of quotes in that slide, was the most common reason for being overloaded and overwhelmed. So what do we mean by real work? How many of you have ever said, heard, etc., the idea that, hey, when you're on call, you just focus on call? I've said it. There's some hesitant hands. We've said it, but 34% of people said they were responsible for regular feature development work when they're on call. So you're dealing with these problems and you're expected to take on the additional burden of on-call. 66% of people were redirected toward on-call work. Like, no, just go work on that, homie. Like, make on-call better for everybody this week. But it is not considered in performance reviews, but you're burning 6 to 8 weeks of your life, or of your job, of your year, on this. So if you were a on-call rock star and you spent super extra time doing all this stuff, ain't nobody gonna give you anything for it at the end. We aspire, we wanna get that cool project, we wanna get that promotion, we wanna be a level 12 senior staff principal Uber engineer. We want all that stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we're not gonna get there if nobody cares about the on-call work. We call this the on-call doom cycle. Production pressure, the upper left, is gonna outweigh any sort of concern for on-call health. Then that's gonna cause overload, and we're gonna get burned out from sort of juggling all these tasks, which means we're gonna get fatigued, we're gonna make mistakes, we're not gonna be able to sort of keep everything in our working memory anymore because it impacts our ability to function. And then despite this, the deadlines remain and puts more pressure on us to ship, and then it comes back around to the top of the circle again, and we think, well, I guess I'm gonna move to another team, or I'm gonna move to a new gig, and they're not gonna do it this way. Well, we're just trading, right? It might feel a little better because you get that excellent training experience from your new on-call setup, right? But what we're really doing is sort of trading burnt-out engineers across organizations. There is some respite from making the change, and maybe you will find something different. But generally speaking, we're just sort of trading burnout. I'm burned out. I don't know that I'll ever come back from it. I'm definitely not the same as I was 20 years ago, but Yeah. If there is a rotation and it's well organized, it's fun. It's good to make a difference in such a direct way. I still like it. I mean, I'm glooming and dooming up here pretty hard, but I still like fixing stuff whenever you're on call, making that alert get tuned, or finding that bug or making that change, whatever. It all feels good to do. So recommendations. I've stood up here wagging my finger at you, telling you that on-call is bad. Let's talk about how we can make on-call much better. And this is what we think you can do today. First off, let's not talk about best practices. Sure, there are aspirational, wonderful things you can do to try to make on-call really great, but what I'm more concerned with is sort of like what's appropriate for you in your organization. And it's different for everybody. Big organizations, small organizations, new ones, old ones, those that are SRE, or sorry, those that are AI, those that are not AI, whatever it is. There are things you can probably do, and we should focus on habits more than on wholesale change. We don't want to say like, rip a thing out and put a whole new one in. If you're in a leadership position and you're seeing this talk, first off, thanks for doing it. But secondly, this doesn't mean you should go out and make some edict in the organization that we're going to start doing this right now. You should be super happy that your teams are doing all of this. You should be asking them what you can do to support them. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But habits are better than wholesale change. Remember, this is back to Ren Daniels again. Remember, Band-Aids are not real solutions. What you do to fix a problem at 3 o'clock in the morning, you really don't want to be load-bearing. It happens anyway, but you don't want it to be. On-call is going to generate unplanned, interrupt-driven work by its very nature. Because again, it's sort of the junk drawer of ops. It's all the stuff that just happens. We need time to fix these hacks later. So we're going to talk about sort of a bunch of the 9 in, stream of consciousness order kind of here. Complex or non-existent processes. Well, there's a bunch of stuff you can do. I'm not telling you, sort of most of these are things that you could probably think of on your own, playbooks. Metrics would be really great in almost any capacity here, sort of thinking about how you wake people up, when they wake up, how much time people are spending on call, keeping track of what they're doing when they're on call, what their support load is, all that kind of stuff. Release engineering practices. There's a big joke like, don't deploy on Fridays, and then being mad at people for saying don't deploy on Fridays. What that really means is don't deploy when there's no one around to help you. Right? Like, if there's people around at 5 o'clock on Friday, I don't care, deploy your butt off. But if there's nobody around, you probably don't want to. Thinking about that, your software deployment tools, like if I'm doing a deploy, does it notify anybody? Is it visible? Can I see? Am I aware? How we handle escalation policies was cited here. Do we know where those escalation policies are? Are they mapped out? Do we understand how to navigate them? Obviously, observability and monitoring can help. Sometimes they're mostly the problem quite often. Establishing risk management practices can help you with that Friday deploy decision. And then, building learning and refinement into your processes with postmortems. We talk a lot about incident postmortems, but we don't talk about like the on-call week postmortem. Just having that discussion. You can postmortem anything. And in fact, my favorite postmortems were at a job I had many years ago. Doesn't really matter where it was, but the ICs organized just like a Wednesday afternoon, let's all get together and talk about stuff that happened this week. And usually a few incidents were picked or some other interesting things, and there was no ego and there was no title. Junior engineers, senior engineers, but it was interrupt driven. A lot of questions, a lot of information sharing. I was talking earlier about if you're in a leadership position and you read about this and you think, I'm going to make some edicts that nobody can get interrupted this often, or we're going to have these size of rotation. In high reliability organizations, aircraft carriers, cool stuff that I don't know anything about, this is what they do. Deference to the most relevant expertise. Who are the people who really understand the systems? Let's talk to them because they know. And then we've got distributed decision making. We've learned here that the team is doing the work together. They're already doing the work. What do we need to do to support them? How do we just give them the resources so that the organization is supporting this instead of the team carrying the load all alone? Being proactive about processes and alerts. I'm a long-time observability nerd. Just allocate an hour every week and keep a log of what you change. Just adjust alerts as you go, assuming you have the permissions. I am a firm believer that if an if an alert pages people, it should have to justify its existence. Like, why? Okay, thanks for the clap. Big, strong believer in that. If you've got clunky tools, I think especially in the SRE space. I was talking to somebody today about the SRE space, and I said, a lot of people in this space I don't feel like really quite understand that they can be buyers too. You can pilot things, you can adjust things in your organization. There's lots of tools in this space, and you have the power to do that. You're supporting this, anyway, so you should flex that muscle from time to time, get those organizational resources to use the software that you think would be helpful to your team. For training and onboarding, bring it into the light. We need to do it. We need to have lots of opportunities for formal and informal stuff. The idea of shadowing, as someone who builds an on-call tool, I can't even define that word really well. Is the shadow the person who's responsible or the person who's monitoring them? I don't know, it's weird. But we also need to provide a mix of formal and informal stuff here. Like let them have opportunities to learn on their own, sort of unstructured, asking questions. My sort of favorite point on this slide though is remember that it's not just technical stuff. It's also coordinative stuff. How do I escalate? Is it okay to escalate? Should I be really polite when I do it? Like, what's the process for escalation? How do I do it? If I get into an incident, how should I behave? Should I talk a lot? Should I shut up? Should I share screenshots? Are memes okay? All the stuff we need to teach people. For scheduling, try to be flexible in your schedules. I encourage people to look ahead, look at times when either you're going to be doing something interesting as an organization or the calendar is doing something interesting. And please proactively just monitor for how often people get woken up in the middle of the night. We know that waking people up from sleeping causes them to just be cognitively not as effective the next day. Just monitor for that. That's pretty easy to do. And design your schedules to account for life happening. For handoff stuff, which I think there's a lot of opportunity for, most people don't do a lot to prepare for being on call. There's usually, I made a joke earlier about the trash Slack channel where you just send all your warnings and stuff. People skim those. Verbal handoffs are the most effective way to do this work. But the person who's incoming needs to do a little work first. And then overall, it's better to allow the person who's incoming to sort of drive the conversation. What questions do they have? Because that's really what you need to know. How do I prepare them? Well, they need to ask. And then more importantly, make sure that there are more interjections instead of readbacks. I'm sure many of you have, if you have handoffs, it's probably like a Google slide template that you write, and then your handoff is you read it to a bunch of people who aren't paying attention to you. That is not a good handoff. A good handoff has questions, interjections, all these sorts of things. So, I've told you a bunch of stuff today, and I can see that my clock has about 2 minutes left. What are we going to do about this now? This set of findings is not good enough for me. That experience was too traumatic, and I care too much about on-call to just stop here. So I want to do more. Today, that's the next slide. The first thing I want to do is I'd really love to trace the development of more on-call programs. If you work for an organization who's also interested in some of this stuff, or if you happen to be an organization that wants to flex their internal muscle and say, like, we'd like to work on this stuff, organization, please support us, let's be friends. I want to measure the impact of on-call over time. How is this impacting you? The positives and the negatives. There's case studies galore here. I'd also love to facilitate ways for us to discuss this as an industry and to share some of these appropriate practices. I think I put that in a talk as a joke to me because of the appropriate slide earlier, and I didn't want to say best practices again. So these appropriate practices. So to facilitate this, the way that I'd like for everybody to work on this is we're all unhappy with the status quo. So I would like us to have a status whoa. Let's get way better at this. We went and bought the vanity domain statuswhoa.com and hastily threw a web page up a few days ago. Then learned that apparently people spell woe differently sometimes. And then we had this big discussion, well, do we need to get woe in other spellings? Should we get status quo to status whoa? It was a whole thing, but we ended up with this, which is at the moment a little light because it tries to address a lot of the things we've shown here. I think there's already a link to my slides that have been posted here even before I gave them to the folks at USENIX. We will put the recording of this talk here, and we'll put more information about what we have found from these surveys. There's a newsletter sign up at the bottom where if you'd like to participate in future surveys, we'd love for you to jump in, share your email addresses. We're not going to product bomb you with anything. This is about the research. We would love to have opportunities to sort of share this information, get more research, et cetera, into the work that we're doing. I want to thank everybody for coming to this talk today. I especially want to take some extra time to thank the people who filled out the surveys. It was so kind of you to take the time to do. The biggest piece of feedback I got directly was, wow, this is long. So I appreciate you taking the time to get through it. I also appreciate the signal boosters and the reposters, people who took the time to share what we were doing with the world. I want to especially thank Drs. Laura McGuire and Morgan Reynolds for doing so much of the survey design, for putting the data together, for putting together a lot of these findings. And I also would love, my company did a lot of this, so I'd love for you to check out hotpot.works, which is the tool that we're building to do a bunch of this work. But again, thank you so much to the survey responders. Thank all of you for caring about on-call and for listening to me talk about this today.